Hello, comrades. Today I'm going to be reading In Memory of Norman Bethune, a speech by Chairman Mao Zedong, transcription by the Maoist Documentation Project, HTML revised 2004 by Marxists.org, where you can actually find it and read it yourself. Anyway, let's get into the actual audiobook itself. In Memory of Norman Bethune, December 21st, 1939. Comrade Norman Bethune, a member of the Communist Party of Canada, was around 50 when he was sent by the Communist Parties of Canada and the United States to China. He made light of traveling thousands of miles to help us in our war of resistance against Japan. He arrived in Yan'an in the spring of last year, went to work in the Wutai Mountains, and, to our great sorrow, died a martyr at his post. What kind of spirit is this that makes a foreigner selflessly adopt the cause of the Chinese people's liberation as his own? It is the spirit of internationalism, the spirit of communism, from which every Chinese communist must learn. Leninism teaches us that the world revolution can only succeed if the proletariat of the capitalist countries supports the struggle for liberation of the colonial and semi-colonial peoples, and if the proletariat of the colonies and semi-colonies supports that of the proletariat of the capitalist countries. Comrade Bethune put this Leninist line into practice. We Chinese communists must also follow this line in our practice. We must unite with the proletariat of all capitalist countries, with the proletariat of Japan, Britain, and the United States, Germany, Italy, and all other capitalist countries. For this is the only way to overthrow imperialism, to liberate our nation and people, and to liberate the other nations and peoples of the world. This is our internationalism, the internationalism with which we oppose both narrow nationalism and narrow patriotism. Comrade Bethune's spirit, his utter devotion to others without any thought of self, was shown in his great sense of responsibility in his work and his great warm-heartedness towards all comrades and the people. Every communist must learn from him. There are not a few people who are irresponsible in their work, preferring the light and shirking the heavy, passing the burdensome tasks on to others and choosing the easy ones for themselves. At every turn they think of themselves before others. When they make some small contribution, they swell with pride and brag about it, for fear that others will not know. They feel no warmth towards comrades and the people, but are cold, indifferent, and apathetic. In truth, such people are not communists, or at least cannot be counted as devoted communists. No one who returned from the front failed to express admiration for Bethune whenever his name was mentioned, and none remained unmoved by his spirit. In the Shanxi Chahar Hopai region, no soldier or civilian was unmoved who had been treated by Dr. Bethune or had seen how he worked. Every communist must learn this true spirit from Comrade Bethune. Comrade Bethune was a doctor. The art of healing was his profession, and he was constantly perfecting his skill, which stood very high at the 8th Route Army's medical service. His example is an excellent lesson for people who wish to change their work the moment they see something different, and for those who despise technical work as of no consequence or promising future. Comrade Bethune and I met only once. Afterwards, he wrote me many letters. But I was busy, and I wrote him only one letter. I do not even know if he ever received it. I am deeply grieved over his death. Now we are all commemorating him, which shows how profoundly his spirit inspires everyone. We must all learn the spirit of absolute selflessness from him. With this spirit, everyone can be very useful to the people. A man's ability may be great or small, but if he has this spirit, he is already noble-minded and pure, a man of moral integrity and above vulgar interests, a man who is of value to the people. Now I read the notes from Marxist Internet Archive. This is not part of the original speech, just the notes. For the first one, the distinguished surgeon Norman Bethune was a member of the Canadian Communist Party. In 1936, when the German and Italian fascist bandits invaded Spain, he went to the front and worked for the anti-fascist Spanish people. In order to help the Chinese people in their war of resistance against Japan, he came to China at the head of a medical team and arrived in Yan'an in the spring of 1938. Soon after, he went to the Shanxi Chahar Hopai region, imbued with ardent internationalism and the great communist spirit. He served the army of the people in the liberated areas for nearly 2 years. He contracted blood poisoning while operating on wounded soldiers and died in Tangxian, Hopai, in November 12, 1939. The second note is C. J. V. Stalin, The Foundations of Leninism, Problems of Leninism, English edition, and then it goes on to list some more specifics. And now I will be giving my thoughts on this in my notes. So first of all, Comrade Bethune uprooted everything and traveled a great distance in service to the liberation of China, which illustrates how internationalism requires sacrifice and it transcends borders. There's no supremacy of one nation in internationalism, which obviously doesn't mean you have to abandon your nation to complete ruin or something or completely ignore it. In fact, nationalism and internationalism are not mutually exclusive. You could have a nationalist and internationalist project. But I'll get to that in a moment. My next point is the proletariat of the capitalist countries must aid in liberation of the colonial and semi-colonial countries, and vice versa, which is actually interesting because with the concept of the labor aristocracy in the capitalist countries, this sort of complicates things, considering is actually in the interest of a lot of people in these capitalist countries that are actually doing the colonialism and the neocolonialism and the imperialism and all that to the colonial countries. And in this case, a lot of there is a labor aristocracy that is created, which makes it a bit more difficult to actually get them on board, get the labor aristocracy and the proletariat of these industrial, non-colonial capitalist countries on board with the liberation of these colonial countries. And just things like in the United States, where I live, there is the left-wing opposition to the government is and the established order is mostly social democrats. For instance, like Bernie Sanders and AOC, and they may call themselves democratic socialists, but whether or not they actually want socialism, they're functionally social democrats. And even with figures like Zoran Mamdani or any number of these more progressive and socialist politicians that have been popping up, most of them, I doubt actually would contribute significantly to an anti-imperialism. Like they'd probably be candidates who would not get us into wars or something like that, but would they actually focus on dismantling the neo-colonial system and cutting capitalism at the root, which capitalism is, of course, the cause of imperialism? Or would they simply create welfare policies in the United States at the expense of these neocolonial countries, giving the American labor aristocracy the benefits whilst built on the backs of the colonized and the colonized countries facing imperialism and neocolonialism and whatnot. So I don't know. I mean, but obviously, still, if you wish to be a communist in a industrial colonizer imperialist country, you are obviously going to need to reckon with these things and account for them, and actively fight even harder for the liberation of the colonial and neo-colonial countries. Yeah. And then my next point is uniting the proletariat of the world can be likely helped through the process of creating an international or internationals. As we've seen, there are multiple internationals. There's a bunch of internationals currently, as far as I understand. There's like internationals for like general Marxism, Leninism. I think there's some Trotskyist ones. There's Maoist ones, Hojist ones, whatnot. Anyway, Mao also talks about narrow nationalism and narrow patriotism, but he specifically uses the terms narrow nationalism and narrow patriotism, showing that nationalism and patriotism aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but a patriotism and nationalism at the expense of other countries, for instance, is reactionary, whereas something like Palestinian nationalism in the face of Israeli occupation, or something like Pan-African nationalism, or any number of examples you could bring up, can be progressive, because they're actually fighting against imperialism, fighting against capitalist systems and all this type of stuff. So yeah, that's important to keep in mind. Comrade Bethune's spirit should be imitated by all revolutionaries. Mao is very helpful at illustrating how revolutionaries should act in this, and he also does this in works like Combat Liberalism, for instance, where he talks about various flaws of liberal tendencies, I guess. He's very good at actually talking about how revolutionaries should act. And then he also points out how problems with revolution or problems with so-called communism